of silver and gold coins and the kind of things that people can actually use to trade with. And yet I hear other people saying that the public yet really hasn't woken up to the need for storing wealth in gold or silver. It's kind of a conflicting situation.
There's just so many of us that the vast majority have not indeed picked up on this yet. And I think a lot of these things move through society the way Moore described the movement of technology through corporations. That there's a visionary stage where a few people, pathfinders, if you will, go out and discover it. Then there's the early adopters, and then there's this gap. And then there's the mainstream that starts to pick up on it after that gap exists. And we're just crossing that gap relative to gold and silver, I think. Because our data suggests that the panic to own, because we get everything in linguistics, we get little phrases that are interesting. And relative to gold and silver, sometime in January of this coming year, the words will be panic to own, as though everybody suddenly wakes up and says, oh, I got to go get some of that.
Wow. So the time to acquire it, if you've got the means, would be now rather than later, I suppose.
That would make sense. Do it before everybody else panics. Yeah. Save your panic for later, you know.
One thing I wanted to ask you about that was kind of interesting, you talk about the swine flu virus and maybe a more deadly version of that being sprung on the public, maybe in conjunction with the Olympic Games, and then people refusing to be inoculated, and that playing into this whole dance. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, there's two specific waves of what we call the refuseniks, and that'll be a more or less loosely organized group of individuals that simply won't go along with the powers that be propaganda about the vaccine and about the disease. And it's coming this fall in a month or so. And then the second wave will be in January or February. Now, the second wave will be relative to the wider scale distribution of a much more lethal version of the virus. Our data suggests that what's going to happen is that somebody who does take or people, not an individual necessarily, who do take the vaccine this fall will contribute to the mutation of it, and we'll get another wave of it in January or February that's actually a much nastier bug, although even that said, it'll be on its way to de-evolving into something less lethal. Its lethality won't be an issue much past June or July of 2010, but it's going to be at least very hyped in the January-February time period, and it will appear as though the Olympics here in Canada will act as a distribution vehicle for the virus on a global scale.
But you're saying then that overall it's not the doomsday mechanism maybe that some people are making it out to be?
Correct.
Okay.
I'm saying that there will be a more lethal version, but that if you're healthy, it's no more threatening to you than regular flu, and it will be a rundown immune system and other issues that would make you vulnerable to it, and that we won't have the level of pandemic die-off that the powers that be want from this, and nor anything comparable to what occurred in 1918.
Now, how do the refuseniks fit into this situation, though, that described in the report where there's if I understood it correctly, there's kind of a repression by the powers that be against the people who don't want either their children or themselves to be inoculated?
In the early wave of the refuseniks in this fall, they'll try imposing individual sanctions in the sense of firing individuals at certain corporations that refuse to take the vaccine, or they'll impose sanctions in the form of saying your kids can't come to school, and they'll do it on an individual level and try and intimidate enough people that way, and through word of mouth get everybody to comply. The issue in the late winter, early spring appears to be a situation where there's some form of a demonstration, protest, something along those lines by people that are refuseniks, that are in other ways, in no other way impacting society other than they refuse to take the vaccine, and they're vocal about it, and that group will be suppressed, and in a fashion that may be reminiscent of something we're seeing in the G20 protests now. And it will be unwarranted, but it'll basically be the first instance within the continental U.S. of or the second, if you will, not counting the G20 now, of the iron fist coming out of the velvet glove kind of a situation.
I see. Does this, I guess in some way, does this work in with the the unemployment situation? If you've got a spreading of the virus, does that result maybe in a decrease in commercial activity, or?
It seems to be secondary in our data to the vast wave of unemployment that comes as a result of the dollar death.
Okay.
Bear in mind that the dollar death is going to have some strange repercussions, because it's going to affect our ability as a nation to buy things for pharmaceuticals, and so our healthcare system is going to start winding down. We won't be able to afford the bribes to all the doctors, so the people that make those bribes will start getting laid off, and there are just going to be all these strange sort of ramifications in large-scale unemployment. So viral activity relative to shutting down industry or whatever, if it's going to be effective that way, is still secondary impacts. Our data has a tendency to be dominated by the spin-off from the dollar stuff, not the disease.
I know right now, you've got the official unemployment rate at about 9.7%, and then you've got other.
Wait a second. You mean by that? You mean the government's official lie?
Yeah, that's correct.
Oh, okay.
Thank you for clarifying that. And then you've got other independent estimates of somewhere between 16 and 21%, depending on how you count the numbers. Do you have an estimate of what it would ultimately end up in then in 2010?
We're looking here at something that's over 55%. Essentially, if you're not working for government, you're not working.
Wow. I mean, that's truly catastrophic.
But our only product anymore globally has been dollars. And once the dollar started losing its luster, we started coming up with, as a nation, all of these strange derivative things, and we sold those and kept everybody pumping up our system for all these years on that mechanism. Now that the derivatives have died, we have nothing left to offer the planet except to bomb them, and they're not going to pay us to do that, so we're essentially going to become broke very suddenly. As a nation, we're going to sort of like lose our job.
So when you get that level of unemployment, what happens to, say, food distribution? I guess that
that goes, and that's when you have revolution, and that's why you see the look of fear on the faces of all the political minions like Pelosi et al.
So, and that is one thing that you actually kind of talked about, I think kind of at length in the report, was that there would be phases of revolution, starting in the early part of 2010, and then lasting on for at least a couple of years. Is that
correct? It may actually start in 2009, late 2009.
Okay.
Because we're going to go through a context change here in December. And by that context change, that means that everybody as a consensus will suddenly agree that that we have a new reality. The last time we had a context change was when one day there were millions of illegal immigrants out there demonstrating and marching, and the day before we didn't have anything. And all of a sudden everybody had to acknowledge there was this illegal alien issue that we had to deal with. Now we're going to have a context change that'll probably be relative to how poor we are and the impact that that's going to have on our future, and that'll come in December. And it may trigger violent outbursts as people realize they won't be saved and their last hopes are taken away, because we'll have all kinds of people losing their unemployment just at the point of time that our government starts to actually have to coagulate, meaning they won't have the dollars to spend, and it may get to the point where they won't be able to buy food for some military base in some country, Uzbekistan or something, who knows. And so those guys will be on their own, and that's going to be how it starts.
I guess at this point, and one of the listeners on chat is asking about what do you do at that point? Just get together with your family and friends and try to survive? I mean, is that the situation?
It seems like a good place to start. We have to reinvent everything from that point onward, and there will be a lot of people that don't have that luxury. And we'll have a lot of people that will be extremely stressed out because, they won't be able to get their favorite addictive substance, whatever it is, TV, booze, meth or cigarettes or whatever, simply because our dollar is just going to be so worthless that even the drug dealers won't sell to us anymore.
Yeah.
So we're going to have to reinvent ourselves, and it's going to be a rather challenging period of time. We need not be stupid about it. We don't have to degenerate into violence and civil war. There will be a lot of people that will attempt to take us that way because it's the first response of the really terminally stupid, that is violence. And it's the last response of the intelligent. And so we need to be intelligent and sit around and think about this with family and friends, gnaw on our shoelaces for a while until we get a good sense of what we need to do before we
I know a lot of people try to talk to their family and friends about these kind of things, and it seems so extreme that a lot of people don't want to hear it, or they freak out when you tell them that. How do you go about, how do you go about breaking the news to them? How do you go about getting a cooperation?
Well, I was going to say, most of my family and friends don't talk to me anymore. It's only people like you that will actually have the guts to dial me up. But they will want to talk to me once they realize that we've reached that level of extremity, because they know that I will have planned to that stage. So, yeah, you're going to be identified as the local nut job, but when things reach to the level of where the nut jobs are clearly the only ones who know what's going on, they're going to come and seek you out, so I wouldn't worry about it.
Yeah, you make a good point.
And it'll get that way. The extreme nature of the language we have, even if we only reached it half to that level of extremity, then we're going to get something far more serious than, the Depression and World War II lumped together.
Okay. And I guess that was one of the things I wanted to talk about, was what will be the trigger of the revolution? Is it just the combination of dollar collapse, people being fed up with the direction things are going? What is going to be the primary factor?
Well, I don't know. That's pretty much going to be an individual kind of a thing. We have a certain level of the populace that's now pretty educated about the powers that be, the creature from Jekyll Island, all of this kind of stuff.
Sure.
We have all kinds of the populace on another end of the scale that could care less about the creature from Jekyll Island, but they're really incensed about NASA lying to us for all these years. And we have a further subset of the populace that's really incensed about all of the vaccine and all those lies. And eventually I think it's just going to be the lying nature and the fact that there's so many of us that know that now that we've been given a really screwy view of the planet and we need to change that. The actual trigger for the revolution in terms of the potential for violence and activity that way probably is going to come from something that the powers that be do, in the sense of a suppression of a vaccine protest or something in a particularly brutal fashion that will tell everybody, okay, that's it, gloves are off, these people have gone totally whacked out, and we've got to do something.
There was some mention towards the end of your report about kind of an arrogance or a provocative message being delivered from the powers that be back to the people. Is that
almost a let them eat cake issue,
right,
or episode. And it may also relate to the starvation in the underclass. Bear in mind that the United States at the best of times had the following relationship. One, if all of the United States could be taken as 100 people, one person owned 40% of the wealth, 19 other people owed 45% of the wealth, and then 80 people were struggling to own or share 15% of the wealth. That was the best we ever achieved. Now we're at the ratio where we have one person that owns 61% of the wealth. We have 5 people that own another 7 or 8% of the wealth, and we have essentially 93% of us struggling to own less than 10 or 11% of the wealth of the country. So we've gone really topsy-turvy that way. So my way of thinking is that it's going to be the starvation and the degradation of life in a very rapid fashion that's going to trigger a violent reaction against the powers that be, and that it won't be safe in the United States to flaunt wealth at all. The idea of conspicuous consumption is going to turn, and it's going to turn radically, probably over the course of only a month or two.
That's pretty darn fast. One question that we had while we're talking about the powers that be from our viewers is, how do you define and who is behind, who is the powers that be? Who are those people?
I can give you names of individuals that I think are within them, but that's dangerous, and I won't. But I'll give you a fairly clear definition.
Okay.
Okay, the powers that be are any of those individuals, various different definitions that'll sort of define it. Powers that be are those individuals that have the security clearances higher than the President of the United States. And there's at least 27 layers of that security clearance. And so I think the powers that be are specifically the top 1, 2, and 3 layers of security clearance within our national security system. Unfortunately, the powers that be are nobody that we've likely ever seen on television or ever discussed in any magazine